Welcome to All Grown Up Now, Tales of a Checkered Past. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is an evolution of the tale, All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts. This is Season 2, and it's called Tales of a Checkered Past. It's a collection of short stories from my salad days on up to the present. In each podcast, another self-contained story will be presented. Enjoy. It's spring with the daffodils in bloom, and this always reminds me of my wonderful dog, Daisy. So for episode 87, I'm going to rebroadcast a podcast that I called Daisy the Wonder Dog. Everyone thinks their dog is the most perfect dog in the world, and I say this is one instance where everyone can be right. This story is about my dog, Daisy. Daisy raised the bar for fabulous dogs so high that I've not had another. There are stories about her that won't get into the podcast, but this is my homage to this man's best friend. In the spring, the daffodils bloom in Union Square here in New York City. When I see them, it reminds me of my dog Daisy. She was the perfect dog, and this is her story. When I was growing up, we had a dog named Tina. Tina was a miniature poodle. She was a good dog. But to me, she was just one more chore, just one more way that Miss Ann could get angry and yell at us for not being perfect. So, when I moved out on my own, I vowed that I would not have a pet. I used to joke that my houseplant was my pet. It was all I wanted to be responsible for. Besides, a houseplant doesn't need to go outside or be fed, just needs to be watered. And if the houseplant dies, oh well, you can get another one. But this tale isn't about houseplants. It's about one of the great loves of my life, my dog, Daisy. When I was 35, I started rethinking the idea about not having a pet. I was self-employed and single and a little lonely. My friend Norma suggested that, to open my heart, I might consider having a pet. Now, I had always liked dogs, and in particular Cocker Spaniels. My sister Kathy had a pair of them, Mikey, a black one, and his best friend Katie, a golden Cocker Spaniel. When I would visit Kathy, I was enchanted by both of these dogs. They were always cheerful, funny, and pretty. They were also the right size for me, small enough for a city, but large enough that I wouldn't accidentally trip over them. However, I'm not one to take on a pet capriciously. I understood that this was at least a 15-year commitment. In the past, I'd had friends who would just get rid of a dog when it became inconvenient, and I thought less of them for doing so. So this would be a process. I just didn't want to take the first dog that came along. Every weekend, I would visit the rescue places to look at adopting a dog. That was another thing. I didn't want a puppy with all the additional responsibility. I wanted a grown-up dog, a Cocker Spaniel, a girl dog, as they're more even-tempered. The search for the perfect dog dragged on for quite some time. I decided that, if I wasn't sure, then the answer was no. A few months into my search, I read the want ads. For our younger listeners, this is what we read in the newspapers before Craigslist. In the want ads, I saw 2 female Cocker Spaniels advertised at a rescue place in Redwood City. I called the number, made an appointment for later that day, and drove down. I was met by a very earnest, dark-haired young woman wearing camo pants and an oversized sweatshirt. She asked me the usual questions about my suitability to be an adoptive parent. Did I have a place inside for the dog to stay? Was my landlord okay with me having a pet? Was my job situation such that I could spend enough time with the dog? You know, that stuff. When I had answered to her satisfaction, she said, "Well, as the ad says, we have 2 dogs. I'll bring the first one out for you to meet." She left the room and returned with a red and white Cocker Spaniel, a very pretty dog. She gave me the leash and suggested we both go for a walk. This dog was beautiful, but on the walk, she didn't seem too interested in me. Noting this, I went with my conviction. If I wasn't sure, then the answer was no. We returned, and I told the lady that I didn't feel a connection. I was a little disappointed and sat down on a chair. She said, "I have another one for you to meet. Let me go get her." She left the room. In a few moments, she came back with this little buff-colored ragamuffin who immediately made a beeline for my chair and jumped up in my lap. She looked at me intently with her big brown eyes. And I knew. "I'll call you Daisy," I said. "You should take her for a walk," the lady suggested. So we went on our first walk. And I was in love. Forever after, when I would talk to Daisy, I would get that same intent gaze. It was the look of intelligence and understanding. It was as if she knew exactly what I was saying to her. Later, when I came back from the walk, I got Daisy's backstory. It seems that she and the red and white one were found at the same time, out in a field near Fairfield. The other dog wasn't too mad at her dirty, but Daisy was. There were big chunks of hair cut out of her fur to get rid of all the mats and burrs. They did the best they could to make her look presentable, but she did look like she'd been styled with a weed whacker. "And I named the pair Daisy May," the lady said. "It took you to know which one was Daisy. They were both inseparable, and I think they both belonged to the same people." Part of the paperwork involved a contract that required, among other things, that we visit the veterinarian for a checkup and mandatory obedience training. She had been spayed and had a tattoo on her tummy in case she went missing again, so they could identify her. This was in the days before the microchips. As dark was descending, I led Daisy to the car, and we drove home. It was the start of a beautiful friendship. My first concern was, is she housebroken? Cocker Spaniels I have known in the past had a reputation for being incontinent, either because of nervousness or a tiny bladder. I had an upstairs neighbor who had a Cocker Spaniel that would pee on the floor when he got home from work. But I attributed that to the fact that the dog was mad that she got left home all day. That wouldn't be happening with me. The next morning, I was awakened by Daisy's hot breath on my face and a paw on my shoulder. She looked meaningfully at the front door. "Good dog," I exclaimed. So she was housebroken. Thank God. Every morning from then on, we had a little ritual. Daisy would tap dance, toenails on the hardwood floor, in front of my bedroom door. She'd walk back and forth a few times and then stop, listening for me to get up. I would lie there quiet. Then she'd start tap dancing again, stop, and listen. No movement. Then she'd let out an exasperated sigh. And then she'd do it again. When she really wanted me to get up, there was a special bark she gave. And that meant, "Get up, I'm not messing around, get up." And I'd get up. The first few days were a challenge. Since Daisy had been lost, leaving her alone was stressful for her. When I would leave the apartment or studio, she would start wailing like an air raid siren. So, I began to leave for a few minutes and then come back. I figured this would show her that I would indeed come back. Over the next couple of weeks, the interval that I'd be gone would progressively be longer and longer and longer, until one day there was no more howling. She finally trusted that I would return. The next task was finding the obedience training. The rescue place had a list of different trainers, and I chose one that was in Potrero Hill. The man running the training was an officious gay man who first off let everyone know that he could make any dog do anything he wanted. He was that good. Since he had gotten a good recommendation from the rescue place, I signed up. Now, I recommend training for anyone who has a dog. As the guy explained, dogs are pack animals, and it was my job to let Daisy know that I was the leader of the pack. Obedience training is for the dog, but also for the owner. You need to know how to communicate to the dog what you want so that it's automatic. He trained us in how to use voice commands, as well as hand signals and leash signals to get the dogs to stay, sit, lie down, and heel. We would stand in a circle to watch the instruction. To demonstrate, he would get a dog from the owner, bring the dog to the middle of the circle, and give the dog a command. Usually the dog would obey. But not Daisy. It was her turn. Taking the leash from me, he led her to the center of the circle. He gave the command, and she just stood there, looking at me. He repeated it, but nothing. Not knowing that he should just quit while he was ahead, he tried and he tried again, but Daisy just stood there the whole time looking intently at me. The others in the class started snickering. Defeated, the trainer brought her back to me. I took the leash, gave the command, and Daisy obeyed, still looking at me. She did pass the obedience school, and we were off. Daisy quickly adapted to my routine. I brought her to the studio every single day, one of the benefits of self-employment. Whether we walked or drove, she was always there with me. Now, I drove a convertible while I lived in San Francisco, and Daisy loved riding in it. While I drove, she either hung out in the front seat, looking over the dashboard, or in the back seat. At stoplights, if she was in the back, she'd stand with her front paws on the back of the seat, looking out over the convertible top to the people behind us. It was a lot of fun, looking at the rearview mirror to see the reactions of all the other drivers, because she was so cute. A few months after Daisy arrived, my studio partner Marshall found out she was going to have a baby. So there was some concern. How would the dog do with the baby? This concern was answered soon after she had little Reed. Marshall used to bring baby Reed in one of what I call those baby buckets, which she would sit on the floor beside her as she worked. At first, she wouldn't let Daisy into her space. But one day, Marshall left the door open when she went to get the mail. She came back upstairs to find Daisy standing, looking intently at baby Reed, not moving. From then on, Daisy became the babysitter. Marshall would bring baby Reed in, Daisy would trot over to Marshall's studio, and I would only see Daisy to go to lunch or go outside. If Reed got to fussing, Daisy would run to Marshall, swat the back of her legs, and look at her as if to say, "Get in there." One day I was working in the studio, and I heard what sounded like a Rottweiler growling. Since I'd never heard this before, I ran into Marshall's studio only to find Daisy had the mailman backed into a corner. All her hair was on end, and her teeth were bared. Baby Reed was behind her. "Hey, guy, could you get this dog off of me?" he pleaded. "I just thought since the door was open to drop the mail on her desk." So I calmed Daisy down and held her so the mailman could get away. Then I gave her a few extra treats. Marshall came running in because she was downstairs and she heard the ruckus. "Well, I don't have to worry about leaving him alone," she said. Daisy, the attack guard dog. Eventually, baby Reed grew up enough to go to daycare. That meant that Daisy had nobody to guard. For months, every morning, she would go into Marshall's studio and wail like an air raid siren. Her baby was gone. As I said earlier, when I got Daisy, she looked like she'd been groomed with hedge clippers. I knew that it was just a waiting game, that I just had to let her grow out enough for the groomer to have something to work with. When that day came, off to the groomer she went. Since she was a Cocker Spaniel, they groomed her with the traditional cut, short on the head and the back, long skirt on the body and legs. Absolutely adorable. Well, I thought it was. She had other ideas. When they let her out of the grooming room, she looked like I imagine I did when I was a kid and we were out shopping for school clothes. I'd hear Miss Ann say, "Come on out and let me see what you look like." And I'd sheepishly come out for inspection. And sheepish was the right word. Daisy looked sheepish. Embarrassed, actually. The look in her eyes said, "What did I do to make you do this to me?" Of course, I went on and on about how cute and beautiful she looked, but she wasn't having any of it. That night, after dinner, she hid behind the sofa. She would peek out from behind it occasionally and sigh. Yes, sigh. The only time she came out from behind the sofa were for dinner and outside. At work, she'd hide behind the sofa in my office. So I called Kathy because she works at a vet. "So what's up with this dog?" I said. "I got her haircut and now she looks at me like I punished her." "Some of them don't like the haircut," she replied. "No kidding." "No, go back and have her clipped all one length." Which I did. I called it the Sinead O'Connor look, and I bought her first of her fancy collars, a black leather one with chrome spikes, and she was happy again. Over the years, Daisy had quite a wardrobe of collars. After the black leather and spikes came the first of the rhinestone collars. Now, pet stores have some rhinestone collars, but I soon discovered that the really good ones, the ones with 5 rows of rhinestones, came from the adult bookstores. I discovered this while passing, the one near my studio south of Market. I saw them in the glass case near the register and went in. The guy behind the counter wasn't convinced that I was actually buying it for a real dog, as it was rather expensive. When I told him this, his response was actually, "Uh-huh." Next time Daisy and I passed by, I brought her in to model. She became their unofficial mascot after that. Having Daisy clipped all one length made it so I could groom her myself. Since I clipped my hair all one length to bleach once a month, I had the clipper. So, every so often, we would play Doggy Beauty Salon. This involved a thorough brushing, locking Daisy into the bathroom, giving her a shampoo, then using the dryer. The first couple of times, Daisy thought the hairdryer was an instrument of torture. Then, she realized that it was a good thing. Actually, I saw the look of realization. And then forever after, she would pose in front of the dryer, turning around and around to make sure I didn't miss a spot. Once she was clean and fluffy, We'd go to her closet to choose which collar she would wear. Daisy's closet was in what I call the Virgin Mary niche in the hallway, that alcove in the old San Francisco apartments where they put the telephone. My Virgin Mary niche had a little door above the phone to store the phone book. It was way too small for the current San Francisco phone book, so I installed cup hooks to hang the collars on, and that's how it became Daisy's closet. Dating when you have a dog can be a little bit complicated. I learned early on that if Daisy didn't like them, then they didn't pass the test. My first experience with this was a guy who lived in the East Bay. We'd get together at his place, but I always needed to go home because of Daisy. So one time he said, "Oh, bring your dog next time. I love dogs." I took him at his word. My mistake. The next visit, I let Daisy off the leash, and she did what dogs do. Started sniffing around, exploring, looking at everything. But the way the guy started watching her, I knew he didn't like dogs. Uh-oh. This was going to be a long evening. After dinner, the two of us were sitting on his living room floor talking. Daisy wanted to play, so she tugged at his trouser leg. And he reached out and smacked her across the face. Oh my God, I was furious. I whirled around and shouted, "What did you just do?" "Oh, I just tapped her." "Bullshit! You struck my dog. I don't strike my dog. Nobody strikes my dog. How dare you strike my dog?" And then, now this is the only time I ever saw her do this, Daisy looked indignant. She got a wrinkle between her eyebrows, got up in his face, and went, if she'd had an opposable thumb, there would have been 3 snaps in a circle. She really told him. Looking at him, I said, "I can't be present for both of you, so I'm going to take my dog and go home." And off we went. Later, after I got home, he called, and he had some song and dance about wanting to get to know me, but, well, there's this dog. "And what's your point exactly?" I asked. "Are you suggesting I dump the dog for you? Because that's not going to happen. We're a package deal." And that's what we were. Love me, love my dog. I used to say that Daisy knew more people than I did. That's because when you have an adorable dog on a leash, you become invisible. But that was okay by me. I enjoyed other people acknowledging that she was indeed a superior dog. Daisy knew her way through the neighborhood, or more specifically, she knew what I called the stations of the treats, meaning which coffee house, deli, or bodega would give her treats. If we walked to work, there was one set of stations of the treats. If we went to the Castro, there was another. One deli near my studio was called Tony Baloney's, and it was one of the stations of the treats. It also instituted what I called Doggy TV. Tony Baloney's was Doggy TV, the deli channel. Daisy knew that if we went in, all she had to do was stare intently into the cold cut case, Doggy TV, and since this channel was interactive, a piece of cold meat would fly over the counter and hit her in the head. Now, there were other Doggy TV channels. The pastry channel at the patisserie where I had breakfast, which was also interactive. Daisy loved croissants. The Birdie channel, which was at the pet store, wasn't interactive, but it was fun to watch. Daisy would make a beeline to the glass bird enclosure and watch the birds, fascinated. The Fishy channel, which was an aquarium at a neighbor's house, wasn't interactive either, but it would hold Daisy's attention for hours. but the window channel was her favorite. When I would travel, my friend Mark, her Uncle Marky, would sometimes take her in to watch her. She would sit in his window seat for hours, fascinated by the action passing below. When she saw me coming across the street after arriving back from traveling, she'd get so excited I was glad he kept the windows closed. Daisy had her Uncle Marky, her Auntie Jackie, her Auntie Merrill, and her Auntie Linda, and her Uncle Stuart. They were the ones who would take her the most when I was traveling. Auntie Heidi would as well, but they all reported much the same thing. Daisy would mope the first day, and then she'd get over it and she'd have some fun. Now, my friend Stuart didn't like dogs when we first met. However, Daisy decided that he was going to like her. Every time he'd visit, she would be her absolute cutest. But no. Then, one Sunday when I was teaching down on the peninsula and stuck, I called and asked him to go take her for a brief walk. "You have the keys to my place," I said. "Just 15 minutes, please." Grumbling, he did it. After I got home, I called to see how it went. "It was the most amazing thing," he said. "How so?" "Well, I just figured she'd know where to go, so I let her lead. She turned left out the front door, put her head down, and dragged me to Market Street, turned right, went down to the Castro, to 16th and Noe, to the restaurant La Mediterranee, to one of the outside tables. She didn't stop once." "Really?" I said. "Yeah. Then the waitress came out and said, 'Hey, Daisy.' Then she followed the leash back and saw that it wasn't you. So she quizzed me about how I came to have Daisy and where were you." "Really?" So I explained to her that I was just helping out. "Okay," I said. "Then what did you do?" And there was a pause. "Well, we had lunch." From then on, he was Uncle Stuart. As an aside, Stuart and I were at the Gay Boy Summer Camp one August. We were sitting around, and there was this guy there named Larson, who was also next to us. Larson looked at me and said, "There's a golden cocker spaniel sitting next to you." Curious, I asked, "Does she have anything she wants to say?" He looked off for a few moments and said, "She didn't like her dog food. She didn't like other dogs. But she wants you to know that when you would talk to her, she really did understand what you were saying." I learned some other things in this conversation, like that her first people were a married couple and she had a little rag rug as her bed. She got out one day and couldn't find her way back, and she always wondered why they never came back for her. Larson looked at me and said, "When you saw her, it was instantaneous, wasn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "She wants to apologize for ruining the rug," he added. "I don't have rugs in my house," I replied. "Oh, that was my rug," Stuart said. "Remember, she got violently ill and we had to call in the carpet people?" Later, Stuart started reminiscing about Daisy. "You know," he said, "she always loved going to La Mediterranee." "Wait," I said. "Always liked going to La Mediterranee. I know of only one such trip." And that's when Uncle Stuart sheepishly admitted that he would take Daisy to her favorite restaurant whenever he would watch her during my travels. Stuart used to say that an intelligent dog was a challenge because you couldn't predict what they would come up with. And Daisy was quite intelligent. This is my best smart dog story. In her later years, Daisy had Cushing's disease, which made her ravenous. She was always hungry. One night I was eating takeout food at my kitchen table when I heard a knock on the door. I answered it and came back only to find Daisy on the chair with her feet on the table, finishing up my dinner. My fault, I thought. Next time, push the chair back from the table. A couple of weeks later, same thing. Knock on the door during dinner. So before I went to answer the door, I pushed the chair a good 6 feet away from the table, past the metal strip that joined the linoleum to the wood floor. That'll do it, I thought. While I was talking to my next-door neighbor, Diane, I kept hearing sounds coming from the kitchen. Finally, I said, "Diane, I think I need to go see what she's up to." The two of us peeked around the door frame to see Daisy, who had gotten the chair back up to the table over the metal strip that joined the linoleum to the wood floor, and she was preparing to jump up and get her prize. The look on her face when she saw us was like, damn. Now, I was torn. That was pretty damn smart for a dog. But at the same time, I didn't want to reward that bad behavior. That chair was over here, I indicated. "You mean she pushed it back to the table?" Diane asked. I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it. Later, I gave Daisy a treat because, really, I was impressed. When I started preparing to move to New York, I got asked a preposterous question. What are you going to do with Daisy? Indeed. I would ask the questioner if they would adopt out their children if they moved to another city. The idea that I wouldn't take Daisy with me? Well, it was, in a word, stupid. My response was usually something like, well, she'll ride in the truck with me, putting her feet on the dashboard, playing with the buttons on the radio, and smoking cigarettes, of course. Daisy didn't really know what was going on. She just knew something was up. I started packing the studio on February 14th and the apartment a couple of weeks later. There was one particular Sunday near the departure date where I needed to get the major packing done in my apartment. This meant the apartment was full of boxes in the middle of the floor. Daisy had definite ideas on how things were to be, and she didn't like this at all. She ran around the apartment, barking at the top of her lungs. I explained that we were going to move to a new city and that there would be a really nice park a block away from home for her to play in. Then I gave her some treats. The night before we left, the only things not on the truck were an air mattress and my suitcase. I have photos of Daisy lying on the floor, looking up at me disapprovingly. She didn't understand what was going on. But the next day, when we pulled away, all of that was forgotten. As we drove cross-country, Daisy got to smell different places and to explore a variety of roadside parks. At night, I'd smuggle her into hotel rooms, feed her diner food, and we both would sleep uneasily. She got her sleep during the day, though, on her little bed in the cab of the truck while I drove. Midway through the trip, Daisy learned about this unusual thing, a backyard. I stopped at my sister Kathy's house in Oklahoma City to give her my car and leave some things for her to store. I also connected with some friends while I was there. As I said before, Kathy has dogs, and she also has a backyard. I thought this might be a treat for Daisy, getting to go outside for as long as she pleased and playing with other dogs. But no. Daisy was so used to going outside on a leash, on pavement, in a city, that she would hold it until I returned so I could actually take her out in front on a leash. She was definitely a city dog. When we arrived in New York, I took Daisy to see her new park. More specifically, I took her to the dog park inside Union Square. It was not successful. Now, when I went to rent my place, I thought, this is an ideal neighborhood. It has a Petco around the corner and a dog park. But Daisy never really liked other dogs. Her reaction when I let her in was one of indignation. Why? These other dogs were running up to her, not being properly introduced. She tried to get out, and it was obvious she didn't like it. So we left. I only tried that one other time. That didn't work either. It just made her pull me the other way when we'd walk through Union Square if it looked like we were going to get anywhere near that dog park. I'd rather not dwell on Daisy's last days too much. She fell ill in the early summer of 2005. It was anemia, brought on by some of her other health issues. The vet who helped her during this time deserves stars in her crown in heaven. Dr. Carey didn't want to put her through extraordinary measures, saying that Daisy was such a lady. She also said that the outcome likely would be the same, and Daisy would just think we were torturing her. When I realized that it was the end, it happened that Dr. Carey was off that day. I didn't want to make the decision, but the other vet in the practice sat me down and said, "We've discussed her case a lot. This will break Dr. Carey's heart, so it's better that it happens today. You've done what you can. Now you have to decide." And I did. I was there when Daisy took her last breath. She'd been there for me for so long, it was only right for her to go, knowing I was there watching over her. Before I left her, I asked for a pair of scissors so I could have a lock of her hair. I keep it in a locket. I sent an email out to everyone telling them I'd be off the radar. Then I went to bed that week, only getting up to get something to eat, flat on my back with grief. The following Sunday, I was in bed, pretending there wasn't any daylight, grieving and dozing. Then I heard it. It was right in my ear, not a dog on the street, and it was that bark that Daisy would give when she wanted me to get up. I'm not messing around. Get up. She was telling me to get up, and I got up, and I went on living. I put her ashes in the ocean at Ocean Beach in San Francisco. Uncle Stuart asked me, "Why there?" My reply was that she loved going to the beach where she would find foul-smelling stuff to roll in. When he remarked that I never took her there, I replied, "Auntie Merrill did many times, but she always hosed Daisy down before bringing her home." As I said, Daisy knew a lot more people than I did. In the spring, when the daffodils are in bloom, they remind me of one perfect moment in time. It occurred one sparkling spring morning in 2005. The path that bisects Union Square in New York was planted that spring in daffodils, which were in glorious bloom. Daisy and I were on our morning walk. She was greeting her friends and chasing the occasional squirrel. We turned down that path, and Daisy happily trotted along, flanked by masses of daffodils. It was a perfect moment. And it's exactly how I choose to remember her. Happily trotting down the path on a spring morning, surrounded by daffodils. Thanks for listening. You can get the audiobook All Grown Up Now on iTunes, Audible, and Amazon, or from my website, allgrownupnow.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have any questions, you can reach me through the website, allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, kennethdking.com.